Hello, Scott. Welcome. Is there anybody else there with you? Let me see. It looks like we've got zero watching. So we'll see what happens here in just a minute. Let me get my book ready here. I got 4 different books going on all at the same time over here in this little pile, and it gets kind of difficult. Okay, so here we are. Tonight we're going to be continuing on with American government. We're going to finish up on chapter 4 and then move on into Liberties. We've discussed most of the items in the Liberties already, kind of tangentially, but they're really good information, really good discussions. And I think you'll get a kick out of it. So we'll start off tonight. Hello. Oh, gosh, look at all the people who've shown up all of a sudden. Scott Hummer. Let me see. Idaho Insider. Sue Me. Diana 2. Holly Ivans. Little Lone Prepper. Wow, what a great group of people. So welcome. We did have a Supreme Court decision today. Gosh, and I forget which state it was. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I believe it was one of the Carolinas, but it was a southern state. Let's just put it that way. A guy was diagnosed as having mental issues, and so he was incarcerated for mental issues. Then the state said, no, doesn't have mental issues. We can't keep him incarcerated anymore. So they let him out. The first thing he did was go home to his adoptive mother and stab her like 54 times. And so the state prosecuted him, and there were 3 charges that they brought up against him. On one charge, they found him not guilty by reason of insanity. On the other 2 charges, they found him guilty. So the defense attorney went to the state appellate, and then from the appellate court to the Supreme Court, and said, wait a minute, this isn't right. How can you find him mentally incompetent for one of the 3 charges and mentally competent for the other 2 charges? So either he's crazy or he's not. Which one is it? And so the Georgia Supreme Court said, no, they can stand separate and all this kinds of stuff. So it went up to the Supreme Court of the U.S., and the Supreme Court of the U.S. in a 9-0 decision said that no. Well, anyhow, what happened was they said, okay, what we have to do, the Supreme Court said, we have to retry everything because there is a conflict between the 2 versus 1 verdicts. And so the defense attorney said, well, you can't do that. If he's already been found not guilty on one charge, you can't retry that case because you've already found him not guilty. So it's really interesting because Justice Alito wrote a supporting addendum to the decision and said, the double jeopardy clause is supreme. If you've been found not guilty by a jury, then that you cannot be retried on that. But it did say, however, that the other 2 that where he was found guilty by reason of insanity are going to be remanded back down to the courts because those verdicts are being thrown out, and so the other 2 counts are going to be retried. We'll see what happens, but basically what the Supreme Court said was, if a jury finds you innocent, you're innocent. The state has no way to appeal an innocent conviction. Okay, so really interesting Supreme Court decision. I thought that was really, really great. Dove Season 91, welcome. Good to see you. Celtic Grandma. I think I always said Little Lone Prepper. Oh, okay, so let me get my glasses. And you know what? I got some lens cleaner, and I left it over on the commode. We call it a commode. I don't know what you call it. It's kind of a tiny bitty entry table where, as you come in, you lay things on it, keys and hats, and evidently glasses cleaning cloths. So, okay. So what I want to talk about real quick is the types of city and township governments. And then from there, we're going to go into the next chapter, which is all about liberty. Hello, Triple G Farms. Welcome. So one of them, half of the U.S. cities, half of the cities in the United States have an elected mayor and city council. Now, there's two ways that the city council can, well, and this is kind of applies to a whole bunch of things. There's two ways that a councilman can be elected. They can either represent a certain district, okay? So they're going to be, in Chicago, they call them aldermen. There are different titles for these people, but they're all basically a council member. So they kind of, we discussed last week, they define that geographical area for that number of people who are going to be represented. And then they vote, and then that representative only represents that district, okay? Same thing. Your congressman, theoretically, only represents you. Your senator represents your state, okay? So, same thing on a local level. Hello, Fioxerus, welcome. And so the other one is an at-large member. And there are some towns that have nothing but at-large members. So basically, let's say you have a city council where you have a mayor and you have 4 city councilmen, so you have a total of 5. They try to keep it an odd number so that they don't have to go into tiebreakers. And those 4 city council members are voted citywide. Let's say they have a 4-year term. What they'll try to do is stagger the terms so that one person's term expires each year successively after that. The next one is a council manager. So there is no mayor per se. It's all run by the city council. And then they have a city manager who does the day-to-day operations. You're going to have a city manager and probably the mayor council system as well. They handle the day-to-day administrative stuff. Their job is, they've been hired. They're a bureaucrat, so they're going to stay there. Very seldom do you see the city managers get involved in the politics of a city. They're pretty much there to just ensure that the bureaucratic portion of it continues on. And but some of those guys are fairly well entrenched, and they carry too much power, and maybe we need to replace them as well. Then the other one is a commission. So a commission is basically, let's say you have 3 elected commissioners that run the city. And so they're going to have staggered terms as well, but they take a vote, they meet, get together, and have a discussion. There is a law here in Texas. What's it called? I forget the name of the law, but there is a law here in Texas that if you have a commission, so you have, let's say, it's always going to be an odd number for that as well. If you have 3 commissioners, they are not allowed to get together, all 3 of them, to discuss anything except during, they have to give 2 weeks advance notice that they're going to get together to discuss something, and it has to be open to the public. Unless they're discussing personnel issues. If they're discussing something that relates to hiring, firing, promoting, or whatever, a person, then that's considered private, and that's all they're allowed to talk about. And then they have to, they can meet in private over that. But they can't meet on any policy issues in private. Now they can meet 2 of them can meet together, but the third one has to stay away. So these 2 get together and decide something. This one carries over to this one. They didn't have a discussion. They carry over. Then they come together publicly and they're all in agreement. Wonder how that works. But anyhow, so that's kind of how the different types of city governments are. Political participation. A lot of places have nonpartisan elections. At the city level, usually in the city level, and sometimes at the county level here, at least in Texas, we kind of avoid declaring political party. Although, there are some counties where it's really important where what party you belong to. So you'll quite often see people running without their party being declared, especially in city elections. So we talked about district versus at large. Talking about first, as far as in 2006, Massachusetts elected its first Black governor, Deval Patrick. In 2008, Louisiana elected Bobby Jindal, a South Asian American, as governor. 7 states had women governors in 2011. While women have made some gains in gubernatorial contests, there's been virtually no change in state legislatures, where women have held 22 to 24% of the seats since 1980. So just, they're pointing out that women, I believe, are 52% of the population, but only have 24% of the seats in the House. What was it? Oh, Seinfeld. I don't know if you saw him or not. He was interviewed yesterday. Evidently, he went to court, or he was at something yesterday or day before, and then he was interviewed afterwards. But it's the first time he's publicly said anything about his religion and his support for Israel. And so he was met by all these people on the street outside of where he was, and they called him a genocidal maniac and all this kinds of stuff. And then all of a sudden there was a lot of stuff on the news that Seinfeld was a white privilege, white elitist, that there never were any minorities on his show, that it was all whites. And so the guy who was interviewing him asked him about that. And he said, I don't care what color you are. I don't care what gender you are. I had a comedy show. And you had to be, in my opinion, funny. So as long as you're funny, I don't care what religion, I don't care what national origin, what color your skin is, your gender, or anything else. You just have to be funny, because people are tuning in the show to laugh, not to count how many there are of each type of whatever on the show. So, I thought that was a fantastic answer. That totally made sense. Talking about patterns of party competition in state legislatures, it shows that the Democrats are going down in the South, and Democratic seats nationally are on a downward trend, and Republican seats nationally are on an upward trend. And this is as of 2011. I think it's kind of gone stagnant. It's pretty much, we're at 48, 48, and 4, 4% in the middle. Those people like me that when I vote, sometimes it's for the lesser of two evils. Okay, so influential members in the community. And this is one of the things you quite often hear a lot of people harping about. Hello, Utah Mike. Welcome. Good evening. And that these people wield an awful lot of power in your local elections. So, of course, the first one's going to be traditional elitists, the old money in town, if you will. The people who have been there on Main Street since the 1790s, all those kinds of people. And then, of course, business owners. So our county seat has a Confederate statue on the South Lawn. And, this cancel culture and everything, they want that statue moved. And so they've had all these demonstrations and everything else trying to get this. It's called Move the Statue. They're having another big march here this coming weekend. And they're trying to get people to exercise enough clout to force the county to move it. So what they've done is they've gone to all the different store owners around the square, around the county seat, around the county courthouse, the old one, that is, the original one. Oh, by the way, that county courthouse was the first time that a KKK member was ever convicted. And that was in the 1920s, 1923, I believe. But anyhow, it's the first conviction of a KKK member in the U.S. But anyhow, so now they're going around to all the business owners who own businesses on the square, that they're around the county courthouse, and trying to get them to sign the petition because they exercise an awful lot of influence, tax revenue and everything else. And so you'll quite often see that the businesses are brought into politics. And same thing with major corporations. Kohl's, for example, is a very large contributor to the Democratic Party. The Koch brothers and their trucking company is a very big one to the Republican Party. Ben & Jerry's has always been very big to the Democrats. Salesforce is very big to the Democrats. So you see all these different companies, and they're very big supporters of either side. My company, I refuse to give anything to anybody. That's your problem. If you want to get elected, you come up with the money. I'm not going to commit myself to one party or the other, or one candidate or the other, because in today's society, when you take a stand and you monetarily support one person against another, you're automatically going to lose 50% of the constituents that you want to have as customers, as a business base. So why do that? Why would you voluntarily choose one over the other, knowing you're going to lose half of your business base? That just doesn't make good business sense to me. There are two. There's one. I'm going to add one in here. It's not in the book, but the next one is news media. And what we see is, yes, the news media has an awful lot of. I trusted the news up until the Tet Offensive of 1968. I think that the news really tried to present facts and let you interpret them. And then as of 1968, after the Tet Offensive of 1968, Walter Cronkite kind of started giving his own twist on what the news meant. And when he did that, Huntley Brinkley did it. I mean, all of a sudden, all the major news casters. And at this time, when this is happening, we had an hour and a half of news a day, period. So you had from 6 to 7, you had a half hour of local news, then you had a half hour of national news, and that was it from 6 to 7 thing here, at least in El Paso. And then at 10 o'clock, you had from 10 to 10:30. They would recap maybe 5 to 10 minutes of the national news, 5 to 10 minutes of local news. The majority of it was focused on sports and weather. So we only had like an hour and a half of news per day. Then all of a sudden, when was that? That had to be, oh gosh. I think CNN started around 1977. I know MTV did, and I know that what was the other one? The subscription for television movies. But anyhow, I think CNN started somewhere around the late 70s, early 80s. And then all of a sudden we had, just 24-hour news all the time. So they had to do something to fill up all that vacant space. So they started getting in all these editorials. And you can see who leans which direction. You've got ABC, CBS, NBC have historically been leftist. CNN, more leftist. MSNBC, extremely leftist. Fox News, right. And I like to use the analogy of a baseball field. Okay. So in my personal opinion, news should be at second base. Okay. But you've got Fox News, which is kind of at the second baseman. So it's right of center. It's not really right, but it's right of center. And then you've got CBS, ABC, CBS, ABC, and NBC. They're kind of where the shortstop is. So they're left of center. Then you've got CNN, which is kind of at the third baseman. And then you've got MSNBC, which is kind of at the third base coach. Now we've got some new companies coming up, Newsmax and a couple others. They're trying to be right at the second base. It's difficult to do that. One of the other problems that we have with our news media, and it depends on where you are as to how you define this, is our field of vision is maybe 120 degrees, okay? So we're going to use my nose as second base. Well, if the majority of the news media is shifting this way, then all of a sudden that center, second base, is now extreme whatever, okay? And so these guys over here who used to be extreme, now is considered moderate here. That used to be extreme, and now you got extreme over here. So that 120-degree focus of where we're looking at the news media and how they're reporting has shifted left considerably since the early mid 70s. So Holly remembers all the Vietnam coverage as well. Yeah. And so when they started showing, especially the Tet Offensive, and I think that the single greatest thing to go against the U.S. in the war was when General Key, I believe it was the chief of police for Saigon, and they caught a Viet Cong, and they suspected him of being a bomber. And Key walked up to him and just pulled it right there live on TV. That kind of swayed even more people against the conflict. But so having live things like that on TV can do a lot of swaying. You can also And we've seen this happen. You've got to get that news story. You want to be better than the other news agencies. So you have a tendency to speculate and report it as fact. Okay. Let's take what happened last Thursday. So every morning when I get up, I watch Suspicious Observer. He usually comes out around 7 o'clock here Central, which is around 6 o'clock in Phoenix, where he is. And he gives a 3-minute update on all the solar activity that's going on. Thursday, we had 3 Class X, which are dangerous, very dangerous solar flares. And we knew that there was going to be electromagnetic interference on the Earth because of these solar flares. All of a sudden, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile start having cell phone damages, right? What's the number one thing all the news stations reported was, Chinese and Russian hackers. They've hacked all the cell phones and everything else. Nobody even mentioned the fact that we had 3 X-class solar flares hit the Earth simultaneous with all this stuff going down. So I was talking with a friend about it, and he says, but Lee, why would it hit one organization more than the others if it's a natural phenomenon, if it's an X-class flare? And I said, because one invests more heavily in infrastructure and infrastructure protection, like maybe having ferrite rods that absorb the E wave of that solar flare, and the others don't. So it depends on how much money you put into making your systems robust and safe against a EMP or CME, whatever the case might be. And that makes sense. So now, what was announced today? What was announced today was that, and I knew it because I had to restart my phone. Wednesday night and waking up Thursday morning, I had to restart my phone because AT&T had a software update. Okay, so they put in this massive piece of software, and the software had a glitch in it, and that's what caused the majority of, in their opinion, the majority of the downage. Now, we may never know what really is true, and all of us are going to speculate, and all of us are going to say, well, they're covering up. And we've caused that suspicion, and that suspicion has been caused by the news media. The news media is the one that's telling us don't trust anybody because we can't trust them. Okay, so now we say, okay, AT&T has come out and said, hey, it's our fault. We had a software update. It was a glitch. It's our fault. Sorry. We're going to give people, a remuneration for the inconvenience. And how often are you going to pay somebody if it's a solar flare? How often are you going to pay somebody if it's a foreign hacker? But all AT&T subscribers who were affected are going to get, I think, $62.50. So that's almost a month's worth of cellular refund for 2 days worth of down. That's pretty good. But anyhow, so the third one, we've got traditional elites and business owners, business owners, news media, and then the fourth one is social media, what we're doing right here, right now. So I can skew things, okay? I can tell you, hey, this is what I think, and there are some of you who might believe it. Some of you might say, Lee, you're full of poo-poo. But I love you guys who say you're full of poo-poo, because then we can have a discussion and find out where we are. Remember the Hegelian dialectic. So the Hegelian dialectic says that there's a thesis, there's an antithesis or antithesis. They merge and form a synthesis, and that synthesis then becomes the new thesis. So because of the Hegelian dialectic, if we exercise that, where we synthesize your thoughts and my thoughts into a new common thought, and we constantly elevating our level of thought into the future. So that's the whole idea behind that. But so yes, I don't mind people. Now, we did get into a discussion yesterday after church. So we were talking about and we were talking about immigration and the church and everything else. And this one guy just kept saying, stop, stop, stop. And he was putting his hand on this other guy's face, saying, stop, 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 not letting the other guy talk. And then he would go into a really long diatribe. And then the other guy would say, and he'd say, don't interrupt me, And I said, wait a minute, guy. I said, the exact same thing you're accusing him of is what you're doing. And Stephen Covey told us that we need to seek first to understand, then to be understood. You're not understanding where he's coming from because you keep telling him, stop, 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 putting your hand in his face. and not letting him speak, but you're trying to sell him your idea. This isn't a discussion, okay? Discussion is two-way. And he apologized and said, "Oh, I guess I know what you're talking about. I'm sorry." And then afterwards, he says, "We need more of this in our country. We need more dialogue." Yeah, we do, but not one-sided dialogue. There's we've got to make sure that we're willing to listen to the other side. He made one or two great points. I said, that's a great point. I hadn't thought of that. Thank you for bringing that up. I can see where you're coming from. That's extremely valid. I appreciate you bringing that up. And that's just the way it is. Sometimes they have some good ideas. Sometimes you have some good ideas. Let's bring them together and come up with a good idea. Oh gosh, Little Lone Prepper, yes. And I had a guy who was, as a matter of fact, when I was teaching at Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, he came in for 98 Charlie, Electronic Warfare Signals Intelligence Analysis course. And really nice guy. And he was in my platoon. And I was talking to him, and he was ex reserves. So he was reserves, but he asked if he could be brought on active duty and change his MOS. And MOS is a military occupational specialty. So I said, "What did you do in the reserves?" He says, "I was Graves Registration," which is basically the guys who go and collect the bodies after a battle, tag them, body bag them, get them ready to go, and then get them ready to, and if necessary, bury them locally instead of shipping them back to the States. Now, in Vietnam, we shipped everybody back, or everybody we found. Other wars, World War II, there's an American cemetery in France and things like that. So he does those. They activated his unit and he went down to Jonestown. So he was the guy who had to pick up all those things. And he said it was terrible because they got there about a week after it happened. All the bodies were bloated and decomposing and everything else. And they had to wear NBC, nuclear, biological, and chemical hazard suits, and be decontaminated because of all the stuff that was going on in the jungles and in the South American jungles after that happened. So, yeah, that's so it embellishes. Well, not embellish. It tattoos a memory on your mind. Pat Butler. Let me see. $5 in New Jersey. Wow. We're getting $62.50 here in Texas. I think it's what my wife told me. Hello, Stray Kitten. No, you're fine. You're fine. Welcome. Glad to see you here. Let me see. Anybody else? So, oh yeah, Pat, absolutely. And I haven't seen a movie of hers since then. So there was actually, it was a twin 40 millimeter anti-aircraft gun. But you're right. The one, it looked like it was just one big cannon, the 40 millimeter anti-aircraft gun. She had on a North Vietnamese helmet and everything. Yeah. Yep. That was terrible. That was terrible. I'd like to know how she got over there and got back. I would have negated her passport. Yeah, nightly body counts was terrible, and that's how we thought we were winning the war, but it wasn't. Let's see here. Oh wow, that is fantastic! I love that. Well, her husband was Turner, isn't it Turner, who owns CNN and the Turner Network, TNT, Turner Network Television. Yeah, so, and he owns a large part of Montana. I don't know if they're still married. They may have gotten a divorce. Listening Grandma, welcome. Great to see you. Thank you for being here. And let me see. Yes. So what happens is with dog tags, you had a longer chain and then you had a shorter chain. And so what would happen is if I were the senior NCO or the commander of that unit, and the body was being, collected and then sent back to the back for disposition, what I would do is I would take the dog tag on the shorter chain, and that would go with my DA Form 1, which is the morning report. By the way, that's the only time that a soldier's name is ever written in red, is when they're KIA on the First Sergeant's morning report, which is a Department of the Army Form 1. And so anyhow, when they hand me a red pen to sign my name, I can't do that. I have to write in black or blue ink. I can't sign my name in red because that is just an Army standard. Only KIA get written in red. But anyhow, and then the longer tag stays with the body. Now, there was a time when they said, take the longer one, put the shorter one on the toe, on a big toe, because the chain was about the size of a big toe. But there were so many feet and legs and everything traumatically amputated because of mines and stuff like that, that was very short-lived. There was a small notch in the dog tags, and that was so that you could wedge it in between the teeth, because once rigor mortis sets in and the jaws lock, then it's a very good place to put it where you can have the dog tag in. And yeah, that's let's get off that subject. Direct democracy. I don't know of too many places that have a direct democracy, although that's what one party says that they are fighting to retain, even though we don't have it. Relations with Indian neighbors. Of course, you realize that they are their own nations. So, for example, they have their own license plates, their own elections, their own laws, and everything else, although they're supposed to be supported by the federal government. Later on, let me see if I can't find it, because I found this there it is. I found this extremely interesting. But I want to go through this American Native information and get that out of the way real quick. And then I want to do this one that I want to share with you on sources of funds. Yeah, so we have the wall. We have the miniature wall come through here about every year. Okay, so in 1830, the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that tribes are domestic dependent nations, not foreign states. So they're inside the U.S., but they are part of the U.S., but even though they have their own government and everything else. 1887, the Dawes Act provides for dividing Indian reservation land and giving it to individuals. So it was a collective, and then it went down to the individuals. In 1934, the Indian Reorganization Act ended allotment and provides for tribal self-government so that they could elect their own officials. Then in 1953, Public Law 280 allowed California, Nebraska, Minnesota, Oregon, and Wisconsin to have civil and criminal jurisdiction over reservations. So even though they're independent nations, they can still, those states can exercise control over those independent nations. 1954, the Termination Act ended federal recognition of treaty and other rights of several Indian nations. So all those things we promised them back in the 1870s that they give up, those things were taken away in 1954. Speaking of which, so we had, let's revisit, because we're talking about this 1830s on. Remember that in 1860, because we had it where states were coming in two at a time, so that you had one that was going to be admitted as a slave state and one that was going to be admitted as a free state. So that way the senators, who were still at that time appointed by the legislatures, would have an equal number of representatives in the Senate. They didn't want to have one state brought in and have superiority over the others, either way. So that all of a sudden they started bringing in three states, and the South rebelled against that and said, you can't do that. That's not what we agreed to. We agreed to bringing in two at a time so that there wasn't going to be any us or you have any domination over the other part. And the U.S. said, well, forget that. We're going to do what we want to do. South said, well, if you do that, we quit. We're going to pick up our baseball bat and go home because you can't do that. That's against the bill that we passed that we agreed to. So they seceded. There was no attempt to overtake the government of the U.S. There was no revolution. There was no anti-U.S. in the sense of take over D.C. or take over the government, anything else. They just said, we're going to take our baseball bat and our glove and our ball, and we're going to go home. We're not going to play this game anymore. So President Lincoln said, you can't do that. I'm not going to allow you to leave. Okay. So he forced them not to leave, which is basically after they decided to leave, he invaded the South. And that was, so we call it, we don't call it the Civil War or war between the states. We call it the acts of northern aggression, because had the United States not gone down into the South, and what were they doing around Fort Sumter was the South asked them to vacate Fort Sumter. And instead of vacating it, they were reinforcing it, and they want to use that as a jumping off base to launch their attacks. So when they brought down more troops to reinforce it, that's when the Carolinians decided they wanted to attack it. And so that's what's considered the start of the Civil War. Okay. So a little bit of that history with that. But remember, to the victor goes the spoils. They get to rewrite everything. So at the end of the war, they said, hey, guys, let's all be family. They said, hey, man, you kicked us. You kicked us like you would not believe, okay? You stomped on us. Everything you ever told us was a lie. Why would we trust you now? You're even going to send people down to make sure that we vote the way you want us to, because you're going to watch how we vote at our election terminals. That's still in effect today. So why should we trust you? And he said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to try to say that we're all one family. So any existing U.S. military installation in the South, okay, we're going to allow the South to name so that you feel like you have some ownership in this country. We want you to feel that you have some pride in this country, that we honor your soldiers just to the same extent that we honor the Northern soldiers. We know that they were fighting for their states, and we want to bring this country back together. Okay. So they did, Fort Benning, Fort Bragg, Fort Hood. Then we get the Antifa, BLM, cancel culture in, and we get a very receptive Secretary of Defense. And so all those things that were promised, notice the trend here, all those things that were promised to the South to bring us back into the fold, to be part of one with the U.S., what has Lloyd Austin done? He's torn it apart. Okay. So history repeats itself. Neither, supposedly. Neither. That's why you can get cigarettes there so cheap. So what happened was when I smoked, we used to order our cigarettes through the mail, and we would get them from Oklahoma, and they were like 1/10 the price of what you'd pay at a grocery store. And then Obama said, no, you can't do that anymore. We're not going to allow the Indians to ship cigarettes through the mail. As a matter of fact, you can't ship any tobacco products through the mail anymore. So he kind of outlawed that. He was very anti-smoking. Okay. Yes, there were some cadets from the Citadel. Did I miss a question? Oh, okay. No, I got it. Okay. So we got up to 1854 with the Termination Act, and then the Lloyd Austin termination decision. Then in 1973, the repeal of Termination Act, which says, nope, the Termination Act was illegal, so we're going to go back to the way it was. So they want to encourage more self-governance by the Indian nations. So they got this bouncing ball, kind of like the labor union laws, right? Pro-company, pro-labor union, pro-company, pro-labor union. You never find a good middle ground. Then in 1988, the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act provides American Indians with the right to have bingo and casino operations in states that allow those types of games. And then in 2009, Obama administration settles a long-running lawsuit, and the federal government returns tribal lands that have been privatized and provides $3.4 billion in restitution. So on page 142, you got these fantastic pie charts, okay? And I want to kind of try to walk you through those and the sources of city and state funding. Gosh, we're going on in this so long, I'm not going to get to the liberties, and they're really exciting. But anyhow, okay, state funding. What are the primary sources of state funding? Now, remember, different states do it different ways. I'm going to, this will probably be very controversial. I will tell you that with the exception of Massachusetts and California, which are very highly taxed states, that the rest of the states are pretty much taxing their citizens at a consistent rate. It's just a question of how they do it, okay? So Texas doesn't have a state income tax. We have a horrendous property tax, and we have an 8.25% sales tax, but we don't have a sales tax. I mean, an income tax. On the other hand, there are other places that have income taxes, like Delaware, and no sales tax. Okay, so it just depends on how your state is structured. They're all pretty much going to get the same amount per person, spend the same amount per person, with two exceptions. Massachusetts, and they call it Taxachusetts for a reason, and California are the two that tax the highest. I'm going to say New York is probably right up there in number 3. Nobody knows. Your guess is as good as mine. That is a strong possibility. You would think somebody would have known something, but they're, they're being consistent with the story. They're doing follow-ups. He was rehospitalized. They're saying that there's different post-operative problems. As long as they're consistent in their story, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I got in trouble in 1978. 1978. I was at Field Station Augsburg, and so I was on I was the mid shift. I was the midnight analyst and reporter, and for this intelligence collection outfit. And so the sergeant major said, "Hey Lee, you've got one of the nicer rooms in the barracks," and this was actually in the NCO quarters. Because I was an NCO, and he said, and the commanding general of the WACS, the Women's Army Corps, the women had not been totally integrated into the Army yet. This is just as that was starting to happen, and she wants to see your furniture, and so I know you keep your room pretty nice. Can she come in and take a look at it? And I said, sure. So she, went in, did a look at it, and then the sergeant major called me and he wanted to know why I had a Texas Secede bumper sticker on my wall locker, and I had the Texas flag, a Confederate flag, and the U.S. flag. And I said, because those are my priorities. I'm a Texan first, a Southerner, and then the U.S. He says, but what about your obligation? What about your oath? I said, well, my oath is to support and defend the Constitution. But there's times that we aren't following the Constitution. So when that happens, I go back to my state, which is Texas. Okay, so sources of income on average for states. Sales tax, 23%, property tax, 1%, different user fees, and these are going to be toll roads, things like that, 14%. They get 20% from federal aid. They get insurance trust funds, 17%, income tax, 19%, and others, 3%. Now for local, so we're talking county and city, it shifts quite a bit. So they're going to get 31% of their funds is going to come from the state, 3% from insurance trust, 8% from others, 2% from income tax, 6% sales tax, 26% property tax. Now notice the vast majority of the property tax goes to your city, county, and not to the state. And then user fees, 21%. So that's going to be, right-of-ways and other things like that, and licenses and business licenses, stuff like that. I will tell you here in Texas that we have a state base, and then we have county city on top of that. So the state base is, I believe, 4.25%, and then the cities and counties can add up to 6% to that. So we have all kinds of other governmental agencies, like we have fire districts, and we have emergency management districts, and we have municipal utility districts, and we have all these different kinds of districts. And each one of those is also a taxing authority. So they can do their own kinds of taxes as well. But I just wanted you to be aware, there is a dichotomy between how the cities and the states are funded. If we go up to the higher level, the federal government, that's pretty much funded through income tax. I would like to see, I am all for what the Germans call Mehrwertsteuer, which is basically a value-added tax, or it is a value-added tax, but it's basically, you never see the figure added to the price. So in Germany, when I bought this dining room set that I'm sitting at right here, okay, so you can see kind of there's the ragweed padding for the Eckbank group. We bought this in Munich in 1985. No, 1984. 1985. Yeah, right before we moved to Stuttgart. And so this cost, like at that time, 7,000 marks. Okay. Well, embedded inside that 7,000 marks, you didn't see it, but inside that 7,000 marks was 18% add on to the original cost. So all I knew was, here's the price, right? I don't know how much of that is sales tax. The Germans don't pay attention to it either. They just know, a beer cost them two marks. Well, maybe that's $1.25, and the rest of it's sales tax. They don't know. They just know it's 2 marks. And then as a U.S. person, I could take that receipt to my organization and go to finance, and then finance did the paperwork. And as a U.S. citizen buying a German good, I got that 18.5% refunded to me. I would like to see that same thing done here in the U.S. I think that, taxing what people spend is a more equal basis of taxation, because rich people are going to spend more. They pay more taxes that way. Poor people spend less. They pay less taxes that way. So if we base it off of expense rather than income, it also encourages a little bit of savings instead of being dependent upon welfare. So it just leaves political view there, if that makes sense. Okay, now we're going to get into Chapter 5 and civil liberties, the Bill of Rights, and things like that. Questions or thoughts or comments here before we start into this, because we've only got about 10 minutes to get into it. Let me catch up with hello, WD Rock and Roll. Welcome. So, and the wonderful thing about when I was working at NSA at Fort Meade was only a half hour away back in the early 70s from the mall, half hour, 45 minutes. And so we could go down to the mall on the weekends. And the one thing about the Smithsonian was, it seemed like, I think it was about every quarter, they would change a portion of the exhibits. So, you can go there 2 or 3 times a year and it won't be the same as the last time we went. Always different, always marvelous. But I do remember it was a hot summer day. Let me see, it had to be 1972. And on the mall at that time, it cost $1 for a bottle of ice water, just one of these from a vending cart. And at that time, I probably made $250 a month. So, $1 for a bottle of water was very expensive. But, that's the way it is. Let me see. I'm trying to catch up with here. Well, Stray Kitten, good. Welcome. Thank you, Triple G. Yeah, if you'd give me a thumbs up, I'd greatly appreciate it. Or a thumbs down. If you don't, then that's fine. Just let me know one way or the other. Starting Bonham. Okay. Okay. So it's usually here sometime around Memorial Day. And I think the reason that we got on the circuit is because Williamson County is just south of Bell County, and Bell County is where Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos, is. And at one time, it was the largest military installation on Earth in the United States until, and this is population-wise, largest in area. It was kind of in between Fort Bliss in West Texas and southern New Mexico and Vandenberg Air Force Base because they had all the firing ranges and everything else. And it also included Miramar Range. But, we had anti-aircraft missile launches shooting down drones in southern New Mexico and West Texas. And then, of course, over there, they had the airplanes shooting down. So that's the reason why those two they have these humongous firing ranges. But since then, we had two divisions, an independent brigade and an independent attack helicopter brigade. So almost 3 divisions at Fort Hood, and plus a Corps headquarters. And so now you have the Corps headquarters and 1 division and the 1 helicopter assault brigade. Oh, we had a armored cav regiment too. Yeah, we used to have the armored cav here, armored cav regiment, 1st Cav Division, and I think it was the 4th Armored Cav Regiment. But anyhow, roots of civil liberties in the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights, remember, didn't get passed until well after, 9 years after the Constitution was adopted, and so the 9th Amendment makes it clear that this special listing of rights does not mean that others do not exist. And the 10th Amendment reiterates that powers not delegated, remember that's Article 1, Section 8, and the 16th Amendment to the national government are reserved to the states. So unless it says specifically that the federal government can do it, then that means it's reserved to the states. Do I need to talk slower? Is that what you're saying, Stray Kitten? I'm sorry. I get kind of excited. Let's see here. So First Amendment guarantees, we talked about that when we went through the Constitution itself. Now, we had a very interesting discussion yesterday, and I gave my point of view on this. And so since it's brought up here in the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause, and we talk about the freedom of religion. So, we got into a discussion about border and what's moral and what's ethical and what's lawful and unlawful. And do we have to, and so this person's point of view was that the Civil Rights Act of 1993 is an unjust law. Therefore, we don't have to follow it because we should allow easy immigration into the U.S. Everybody has the right to come here. And so that was his position. That's fine. And he said, and so the government has the responsibility of taking care of people once they come on their property. I said, it hasn't always been that way. Okay. So if we look back historically, if we look back at the founding fathers and what they intended, there was a clear delineation between church responsibilities and state responsibilities. So most of the things that were church responsibilities have been taken over by the state, even though, that one party likes to quote the Thomas Jefferson personal letter to the First Baptist Church of Danbury, Connecticut, who complained to him that they were being persecuted by the Puritans in Connecticut, and they wanted him to send down protection for them not to be persecuted. He said, I can't do that. There's an inseparable wall that separates the federal government and the church. We cannot intervene on the church's things. But then, starting in 1867, they started intervening in the church's things. So what were some of the things that the church, and I'm speaking generically here across the board, okay? What were the things that the churches did? Marriage licenses and definitions of marriage, orphanages, hospitals, taking care of widows and orphans as well. So, all these things, these social programs that were in the United States, until they were encroached upon and the government forgot that part about the inseparability of church and state, they started encroaching on and taking over the responsibilities of the church, so that now they've diminished the church down to nothing. Well, what happens when you diminish the church down to nothing? We saw that in 1917. In the great Oktyabrskaya Revolution, right? In the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks and the Loyalists and all those people, and the Streltsy, and so remember, the religion's the opiate of the masses. Therefore, the government has to do everything. We are very rapidly approaching that here in the States, where the government's going to define our morality. They already are. in a lot of ways, and that's not the way we were designed to be. Let me see. Okay, straight kid. I'll try to do that. So anyhow, that's kind of that whole First Amendment thing about that the state shall make no law regarding the establishment of a religion, is what it says. So why was that so important to the founding fathers? Because they were leaving the Church of England. Okay, and so in the Church of England, when King Henry VIII broke free from the Catholic Church. Remember that up until 1517, pretty much in Western Europe, and I'm going to delineate that because you had the Western European, Eastern European. So the Eastern European were the Orthodox Church, the Western European was the Catholic Church. Once we had, what was Helen's son's name? Constantine. Constantine, when he won his battle under the sign in hoc signo, under the sign, the cross, you will conquer. Then he converted all of Rome in about, I think it was 400-ish AD. So up until that time, Rome was actually a pagan country. And so then after about 400 AD, the Catholic Church took on the title Roman Catholic Church to differentiate from the Istanbul Orthodox Church, right? So the two major portions of it. So up until the Protestant Revolution in 1517, under Martin Luther, if you were Christian, you were Catholic, okay? And so then Henry VIII wanted to get a divorce. He couldn't get a divorce. The church wouldn't give him a divorce. So he said, well, if you won't give me a divorce, then what I'll do is I'll just leave the church and form my own church. And he did that. He formed the Church of England. But the Church of England still has pretty much, I'm going to say 95% parallel with the Catholic Church. The Lutheran Church is 95% still in parallel with the Catholic Church. So is the Episcopalian Church. I mean, there's a lot of things. The only thing they don't have is they don't have a central figure like the Pope, okay? They have a council, which is pretty much like the cardinal, the school of cardinals. They just don't have one person who leads that council. They're elected on a regular basis. But anyhow, you were part of your income tax was they collected tithes, whether you were Christian, Catholic, and this is why you had the Catholic Protestant wars, with Mary and William and all these other guys in England. The War of the Roses was because they were taking 10% of everybody's income as a tithe to the Church of England. Okay. Well, the one good thing I can say about King Henry is King Henry had the first attempt at translating the Bible, and he took the Latin Vulgate. So he took the Latin Vulgate Bible and had it translated into English, and that was called the Geneva Bible. So if you take a look at the Plymouth Rock, the Bible that the Pilgrims brought with them was the Geneva Bible. Shortly after the Pilgrims came here, we had a new king in England called King William. King William had a problem with the translation of the Geneva Bible because it didn't quite emphasize his role as a God-given king. So he had it retranslated a little bit more advantageous to the royalty of England. So whenever possible, it was translated such that it lended credence towards the British royal family. Okay, and so once King James had that translated that way, then it became what is now probably the most popular translation of the Bible in the United States, which is the King James Bible. So just a little bit of Bible history there, but that's the reason why they were forced to tithe to the Church of England, even if they were non-believers. So they didn't want to have a church of the United States. So that's the reason that the First Amendment says, nor the establishment of a religion. We don't want to have a state religion here in the U.S. We don't want a theocracy. Let me get up here. Don't have any problems with people coming here, but I think they should be vetted. Absolutely. And that's the whole reason why we need legal immigration at controlled access points. And we also need to follow international law. And the international law says that you seek asylum at the first country you enter after leaving your home country. So Venezuela, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Colombia, those people, none of them border with the U.S. So we aren't their country to come to for asylum. Same thing with China. China is coming across the border. They're flying to Mexico and then coming across the border in San Diego. Well, guess what? The first country they entered after leaving China was Mexico, so they should apply for asylum there. Let me see here. I'm caught up, so I can talk fast now. I will try to do that for you, Strike In. I will try to do that. Let me see. Hello, Ting Ting. Welcome. Good to see you. How's the weather there in southern Missouri tonight? Are you cold? No, Ting Ting is not Chinese origin. She's just like you and me, Heinz 57. Okay, so freedom of speech and the press, freedom of press has been abused. That's why we have these guys who are reporting false stuff. I found it interesting. There was a New York newspaper that is upset that the New York Post is fact-checking things that President Biden says, but yet this same organization wants everything that President Trump says fact-checked. So I don't care. They either fact-check nobody or fact-check everybody. Just as long as it's equally applied across the board, that's all I want. Just equal justice, equal application of the law. Let's have one law. Let's have it enforced equally across the board. Let's have everybody subject to it. I don't know if you saw the news or not, but the governor in New York has come out and told all the other businesses, because some of them were getting ready to leave New York because of this trial of President Trump, all the other businesses do the exact same thing. I mean, I tried to get advantageous records, not records, but adjudication on the value of my store for loans purposes, for sales purposes, for all kinds of purposes. I'm going to try to get the value up there so I can get as much out of it as I can. So I did it, but there are plenty of businesses now that they've sued Trump and he's got this violation of the Fifth Amendment and this exorbitant, unreasonable fine. A lot of businesses are saying, we're leaving New York. We aren't going to be subject to that same stuff if that's how you're going to play games. And so the governor in New York has said, no, this is the only case we're going to do it in. We promise you we will never do this again. Well, if you're not going to do it again, if you're not going to hold everybody to the same standards, then vacate the sentence on the one that you just did. Make it equal across the board. That's all I ask. Let's have parity in the application of laws instead of, hello, Jack, welcome. And instead of, I'm going to weaponize the government against you. So little on preppers like me, she's a Heinz 57. Okay, so let me dog-ear this page because we got protected speech and press, and then we've got this law called hate speech, and then we've got libel and slander. So do we have free speech or don't we? That's the question we're going to be asking, and we'll try to answer the next time we get together on our discussion of U.S. government and intro to civics. So we're going to primarily be talking about freedom of the press, freedom of speech. Do we really have either one? Any last thoughts or comments? You know what I found out in my Bible study today? Numbers 6 and Deuteronomy 6. I thought that's really interesting. So let me do Deuteronomy 6, because Deuteronomy 6 is, remember, Deuteronomy is the second book of laws. Deutero is second in Greek. Onomy is the law. So it's the second book of the laws. So you have Exodus and Deuteronomy are the two books of the laws. And then you have Leviticus, of course, it comes from Levi, the rules of the church, the rules of the priests. Okay. So in Deuteronomy 6, verse 4 and 5, you have basically, this is what Jesus quoted to the Pharisees. It's called the Great Commandment, the Shema. And Shema in Hebrew means hear. So it's Shema Israel. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Therefore you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart, with your whole being, and with your whole strength. So that's Deuteronomy 6. Then we can go back to number 6, and we'll close out with number 6. And number 6 says, the priestly blessing, number 6 verses. I want to start at 22, just give you a little bit of background on this. The Lord said to Moses, speak to Aaron. Now Aaron is, right, his brother, and his sons, and tell them, this is how you shall bless the Israelites. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. So with that, just one reminder, two reminders. Tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, we're going to have our nonfiction book club. So we're going to be doing projects 9 through 12 of the food storage for preppers. We're also going to take a look at weeks 9 through 12, what you should be getting as far as prepping materials to get. Our goal here is, if you follow his plan, you will have 2,000 calories per person for 2 people for 10 months. So that'll get you almost a year's worth of food, 2,000 calories per person per day. So Stray Kitten says, I was just watching. Oh, wow. Luke 6. That's great. My favorite's John 6. And that's one of those chapters that doesn't get read too often in the other denominations. Yeah, I did Father Mike Schmidt's and Ascension's Bible in a year 2 years ago. Then last year I did Catechism in a year, and then this year I'm doing the Bible in a year all over again. So, and then they've just added a new one to it, and they've got the Bible. They've got the timeline, Ascension timeline. So it's talking about basically a lot of the geological, historical, and other facts that surround the history. So you got the biblical history, and then you've got the social history, archaeological history, and that's what they're kind of doing with this new thing that comes out every morning as well. Okay, so 2 things tomorrow night: the food storage for preppers, and the week-by-week plan. We're going to do 4 weeks at a time until we get through this book, because I think it's important that you get that very quickly so that you have an opportunity to survive this catastrophe that we have coming upon us. Thursday night, the 29th, leap year, is the last Thursday of the month. So we are going to be talking about Exploring Home by A. American, and the continuing saga of what I call Morganville, Morgan and his group of people. They have been joined by 3 people. So Carl and Emery, and I forget the third guy's name. But anyhow, Carl is a real person. He has, I think it's the American Rifleman. I'll look that up for you. He has his own website here he has a YouTube channel. Matter of fact, on Monday nights, his live is from 7 to 8. So sometimes I watch his live and then I come here. But that's the real Carl, 3rd Special Forces Group. And Emery is an Israeli Special Forces guy that works with Carl in their training, tactical training. So they're mentioned in here, and they get a little bit more activity in this book this time. So, Chris Weatherman, the author, A. American, he has a friend. He has a relationship with these guys, so he does an awful lot. Thank you, Triple G. Tactical Rifleman is Carl's. Triple G, I think I made you a what do you call it, moderator. Would you be kind enough to see if you can put up Tactical Rifleman's link, and that would be great. Okay, Scott, have a great evening. So remember that we're all in this together, so we can come out the other side together. And I've gotten some great things in the mail from you all. Thank you so much for that. Greatly appreciate it. I'm trying to find a plan where Triple G and I can have lunch together or dinner together next Saturday, and we're going to try to see if we can't work that out. But remember that if you don't have a place to go, come here to Central Texas. So remember, we're all in this together, so we can get out the other side together. Please be kind, polite, and respectful to each other, because togetherness is the key. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.